You weren't a soldier anymore. Just a lonely old man with a blazer too neat for an airport and eyes that had seen too many farewells. That's what the gate attendant must have thought as she sighed and turned him away without a second glance. No salute, no warmth, just a scanner beep and a dismissive shake of the head. Raymond Holt didn't argue. He never did. He simply stepped back from gate 32, still gripping the worn leather ticket folder, and eased himself down onto the cold metal bench near the wall. His blazer was navy wool, weathered but pressed, with a faded 101st Airborne patch barely visible near the shoulder seam. His shoes were shined like it was inspection day, and on his lap sat an old brown hat with a small tear on the brim, the kind you didn't throw away because it had already been through too much. But none of that mattered now. The woman behind the counter had told him his military ID was non-compliant with current federal standards, and that without a real ID, he couldn't board any commercial flight, even if it was to Arlington, even if it was Veterans Day, and even if the flight had already been paid for by a veterans charity. He simply wasn't verified. And so, he sat quietly. No fuss, no protest, just stillness, like he'd learned all those years ago in the jungle. Wait, assess, and act only when it counts. If you agree that respect should never expire with the ink on a card, like and subscribe, because stories like this shouldn't fade quietly like passengers forgotten at the gate. It had started with a phone call. Raymond had been invited to lay a wreath in Arlington for his fallen unit. Only 2 others still living, one too frail, the other already gone. He hadn't flown since 1989, hadn't left his county in over a decade. But when the invitation came, signed by a retired general who still remembered, he put on his old blazer, clipped on the silver star ribbon he never wore, and left the rest to fate. He arrived at the airport early, well before sunrise, with a folder full of printed itineraries, 2 forms of ID, and a pocket-sized photo album of 8 young men in camo smiling in a rice paddy, all but him now etched in stone. He had practiced how to ask for help, had written it on an index card just in case his words got slow. But none of it mattered. The moment the scanner rejected his ID, the moment the young woman, barely old enough to rent a car, looked him over like a man trying to cheat the system, he knew what time it was. "Sir, you'll need to rebook when you have proper identification," she'd said, not unkindly but hollow, like she'd said it too many times to care anymore. "Next in line, please." Behind him, people shuffled. Some stared at their phones. One man groaned loudly about boomers wasting everyone's time. Raymond nodded once and stepped aside. Across the terminal, a teenage boy in a hoodie watched the old man settle onto the bench. His name was Kyle, and he hadn't meant to notice, but something about the man's stillness felt wrong, too calm, too disciplined, like he was waiting for a briefing that would never come. Kyle lifted his phone and, almost without thinking, snapped a photo. Just one. The old man with the brown hat and polished shoes, sitting straight despite the rejection, staring at the departure board like it still owed him something. The post went up on a veteran subreddit an hour later with the caption, "They wouldn't let him fly." All he said was, "It's okay. I've been left behind before." It started there, as these things do, with silence, and then a whisper, and then an avalanche. A former Army captain saw it while sipping coffee in a lounge in D.C. She reposted it to a closed DoD group. An Air Force pilot recognized the name on the itinerary posted in the comments, Raymond Holt. He'd heard that name before. At the academy. In a tactics seminar. They said he once navigated an entire recon team out of hostile terrain on foot after radio contact was lost for 12 days. Within 90 minutes, it had reached someone at FAA liaison desk. Then someone at Joint Base Andrews. Then someone who used to be someone, now working in a suit but still carrying a star in his wallet. And while all this churned through the invisible gears of the military whisper network, Raymond just sat. The same stillness. The same poise. He didn't check his phone. He didn't have one. Instead, he unfolded a small, frayed letter from his blazer pocket and reread the words for the 50th time. "You are the last, Sergeant. If you can make it, we'll be waiting at the stones. Bring the coin. We saved you a spot." He touched the edge of a challenge coin resting in a hand-sewn pouch pinned to the inside of his lapel. One coin, one seat, one promise. Then came the announcement. Not from the gate agent, not from the overhead scheduler, but from the tower patched through by someone who still remembered protocol when the nation forgot. It was shaky, just slightly off-pitch, but unmistakably real. "All personnel at Gate 32, please pause operations. You are currently in the presence of Staff Sergeant Raymond Holt, recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, and former unit commander of Echo Recon 6. This man flies today, and he flies free. That is not a request. That is an order. Gasps. Stillness. The gate agent's eyes widened. She blinked twice and stared at the screen, then back at Raymond. He hadn't moved. Just raised one eyebrow like a man who hadn't heard his name spoken properly in 20 years. She stood. Slowly. "Sir, would you mind stepping forward?" she asked, her voice no longer robotic. He stood, straight-backed and steady, and walked like he was still in uniform. Every step measured. Quiet. Final. They didn't print a new ticket. They tore up the old one and opened the gate manually. A captain in full-service dress met him at the jet bridge. No salute, just a nod of respect so deep it silenced the boarding area. Raymond gave the faintest nod back and said only 5 words before boarding. "Sorry for holding up boarding." But no one minded now. Not anymore. Because they had finally remembered what the scanner forgot. There are few things left in the world more powerful than an old soldier's name spoken by someone who remembers, and that morning, somewhere between a snapped photo and a whispered call from a control tower, Raymond Holt's name stirred the kind of silence that doesn't need explaining. After boarding began again, flight staff paused as a message flickered across the crew console. Honor transfer confirmed. Passenger is VIP. No override. Full escort. That alone would have been remarkable, but it wasn't the end. Somewhere 600 miles away, in a quiet government office behind a nondescript wall of brushed steel, a retired Air Force general named Collier Baxter read the message on his private device and stood up so quickly his chair rolled into the glass. His aide asked, "Is something wrong, sir?" He didn't answer. Instead, he simply said, "Get me the tower. Gate 32. Now." What followed wasn't a press call or a flag-waving tribute. It was a silent chain of signals and voice confirmations, a process buried in dusty manuals under post-service tactical protections, a relic from another time, still in place for only a handful of living names. Raymond Holt was one of them. Meanwhile, aboard the aircraft, the first officer stepped into the aisle mid-boarding, walked to the front, and greeted the man in the navy blazer as though he were brass, not passenger. "Sir, may I assist you with your seat?" Raymond looked up, slightly startled. "It's just 23C, he said with that humble, steady calm. "Sir, we'd like to offer a flight deck seat." Jump seats open. Raymond blinked once. "I'm no pilot." The officer smiled. "Neither was my father. But he fought next to a man named Holt. He told me, if I ever ran into that name, I should stand up and shut up. So, sir, if it's all right with you." "I'll be standing." Raymond didn't argue. He never did. He simply nodded and rose, and every passenger watched in silence as the old man was escorted down the aisle, not as cargo, not as courtesy, but as command. In the tower, the announcement continued, "All traffic near Gate 32, stand by. Air Transport Control confirms clearance priority for flag designation, veteran escort." That tag had not been used in decades. It wasn't about rank. It was about legacy. At baggage 4A, someone on duty recognized the name on the printed tag. Echo 6 Unit, 1972 Pacific Recon. He whispered it to a colleague. That colleague whispered it to a security lead. Within 20 minutes, over a dozen former service members, now airline mechanics, traffic control staff, and federal screeners, had quietly reassembled along the edges of Gate 32 in maintenance jackets and TSA blues, standing at attention with nothing but hand-on-heart posture and memories they hadn't spoken in years. Meanwhile, in Seat 1A, Raymond sat quietly, his hands folded across his lap, the window light tracing deep creases on his weathered hands. He didn't speak until halfway through the flight, when the pilot leaned over and asked him if it was true, "You carried a wounded man 3 clicks uphill in the dark?" Raymond didn't look away from the clouds. Only made it because he sang the whole way. Didn't want to die alone. The pilot nodded once, then left him to the sky. At arrival, it wasn't applause or cameras that waited. It was silence, 2 honor guard officers in dress uniform, standing beside a black sedan with no tags and a folded flag on the dash. The gate staff stood still as the captain announced, "Please remain seated while Staff Sergeant Raymond Holt disembarks first." This is not a delay. This is recognition. And when Raymond rose, every passenger rose with him. No one told them to. They just knew. Because legacy travels quieter than fame, but when it walks by, the whole room feels it. And as he passed row by row, hat in hand, blazer straight, polished shoes like parade day, no one looked at their phones. Not a single soul said a word. It was the kind of quiet you only hear when history walks through the aisle and you realize, maybe for the first time, You were lucky enough to stand when it passed. They didn't expect him to walk the hill. Not at his age. Not with that limp. But Raymond Holt never asked for ceremony. He just asked for the hill. The air at Arlington was sharp and solemn that morning. The kind of cold that bites through your blazer no matter how many layers you hide under honor. The sedan dropped him at the base of Section 60, and when the driver moved to assist, Raymond waved him off gently. I walked out once carrying two. I can walk and carrying none. So he did. Step by step, past rows of polished headstones like soldiers still standing watch. In his hand, the small velvet box that held the coin. In his pocket, the photo of 8 boys too young to die, too brave not to. They were waiting, not in body, but in name. Row 47, Stone B, 19 through B, 26. He paused before each, pressing his fingers briefly to the etched surface. Whispered a first name, never the last. They were brothers, after all. When he reached the final one, Lieutenant Jared Owen, the last to fall and the first to lead, Raymond knelt slowly, the weight of memory bearing down harder than gravity. He laid the coin on the grave. I made it, he said softly. Didn't get there in 72, but I'm here now. And then, slowly, he saluted, not crisp, not perfect, but pure. Behind him, footsteps approached. Not loud, not formal. A woman in a dark uniform, hair graying, medals heavy on her chest. General Marion Owens, Jared's sister. She had flown in from overseas when she saw the viral post. She didn't speak right away. Just stood beside him, her eyes wet but clear. He talked about you, she said. Said you kept him laughing in the dark. Raymond nodded, still kneeling. I tried. She knelt beside him. You're the last one left. He gave a half smile. Not anymore. They remembered. And then, without fanfare, without warning, a quiet ripple moved through the cemetery. Not from trumpets or rifles, but from people. Visitors. Groundskeepers. Even 2 junior cadets on a tour. One by one, they paused and turned toward row 47. Word had spread. It's the one from the flight, someone whispered. And like that, silence took its place. The kind that doesn't demand attention, it earns it. Later, when the general offered a private service, Raymond declined. No speeches, he said. They didn't get one. I don't want one either. Instead, he left behind one final thing, a page from the letter in his pocket, tucked under a stone. To those who remember, you're why we did it. To those who forget, we did it for you anyway. As he walked back down the hill, slower now, cane tapping softly beside each step, no music played. But every footstep echoed louder than any anthem. At the gates, the young cadet snapped to attention. One saluted. Sir, we read about you. Raymond stopped, looked him over, and nodded. Then walked like it matters. They watched him leave, upright, steady, proud. No parade, no title. Just a man who had been denied a seat, until the country finally stood to give him one. Not because of what he asked for, but because of what he never stopped carrying.